So, David.
Yes.
Interesting thing.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, I was, perusing the internet.
You were on the internets.
The internets, and something caught my eye.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
It was
You're not looking at porn again, are you?
Actually, yeah, as we speak.
Oh, my God.
It was basically Ukraine has detained a woman over a plot to assassinate Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes, I read about this myself. Please go on.
Yeah, and it was basically a Ukrainian woman who was detained in this assassination plot. She was caught giving out details about trying to get details of his whereabouts.
Where he was going to be when he went down to southern Ukraine to visit the troops.
Yes. So then that started me down a rabbit hole. And no, I didn't go into a deep, dark hole.
You're
like
building
you do.
a blanket fort at home, aren't you?
Okay. I may have the sides up.
I put a blanket over my head.
Yeah. And what I found was Russian spies were basically declared more effective than the army.
This is an absolute spy war.
Yes.
Right? And I think we really need to have a really close, hard look at what's going on over there in Eastern
Close and
Europe.
hard, you know that's how I like it.
Well, you're the one looking at porn under a blanket.
It's true. You're listening to I Spy, the assassination attempt of Australian intelligence.
Yeah, g'day. You don't know where I could find someone to kill, do you? Just asking for a friend. Asking for a friend.
That's an interesting question.
No. It's just a political killing. It's nothing personal.
Okay.
Anyone that needs to be shot around here.
Do you have a gun?
Oh, God, I'm in Australia. No, do I?
No.
Oh, well, looks like I'm going to have to choke him out.
Okay. Hello and welcome to I Spied. My name is Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan. And yes, we're going to tackle spies, but we're going to tackle spies in regards to the current war, the Russian-Ukraine war, and what's going on there.
Yeah. Now, I actually, somebody said, I might have even been on Twitter, and if you want to get into the conversation. X.
You can
Twitter.
X us.
You can X us at I Spied Podcast.
At I Spied Podcast.
Now, somebody actually said in about 5 to 10 years,
Yep.
all of these amazing stories are going to come out about what the spies were getting up to during the Ukraine-Russian war. Because what's really interesting is it's not just the Russians that are doing some really good work with it. It seems that the Ukrainians are doing a hell of a good job as well.
Yes. Now, I have found, I was doing a little bit of research and there was a lot of Ukrainians, particularly like in those Ukrainian, the Russian-held parts of Ukraine.
Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia.
but they're Russian-speaking.
Yeah.
And there was this assumption that, if they're Russian-speaking, that they would automatically fall on the side of Russia, but apparently no. There's a lot of instances where they haven't liked what they're seeing. And I think also, from what I've read, there's a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians who think that, we didn't expect that they would bomb us.
Yeah. And look, this is the thing that's going on as well. A lot of the tactics the Russians are using, which are tactics they've developed in Syria, here's an interesting point. Russia are still in Syria. Right, so their military split.
They're everywhere.
But what's really interesting about this is there's a thing they call the double tap.
Yep.
Right. Now, it is illegal to bomb, it's a war crime to bomb a hospital.
Right.
So what the allies, the Americans and their allies were doing in Syria were saying to the Russians and the Syrians, this is a hospital, don't bomb it. Within 48 hours, that hospital would be bombed. Now, what they do is the double tap is they'd send a missile into the hospital, blow it up, wait 40 minutes when the first responders arrived, then hit it a second time.
It's terrible.
Now, they're doing that in, I think it was Donetsk or near Donetsk, a hotel that was popular with journalists was struck. And then 40 minutes later, when all the responders were there, it was struck again.
Well, there's been a lot of instances, particularly in wars currently, where journalists are being targeted, whereas previously, that wasn't the case. Journalists were never targeted. They were there and they were seen as just someone who was... Well,
1975 in Balibo in Timor.
Yeah, it's about Balibo. Yes, but I mean, that was a rare occurrence.
Well, the interesting thing is with journalists, and we can talk about this was one of the things about the first Gulf War was they were embedding journalists with the troops.
Yes.
And then they realised, hang on, we're getting too much information out. That's why journalists are being targeted, is we don't want people to know, which is where our intelligence services come in, at least their intelligence services per se. It's not particularly Australia that's doing the work. But over there, the intelligence services, the thing about a war is we talk about the grey zone. This is literally the black zone. Stuff is going on behind enemy lines on both sides
Yes.
that we just don't know about and we won't know about.
Yeah, well, actually, speaking of Black Zone,
Yes.
I've just started getting deep into The Blacklist. If you haven't watched it with James Spader,
Oh,
my
yeah,
God,
yeah.
it's so good. Anyway, they're up to their 10th season. There's 22 eps a season. It's a lot of viewing, but let me tell you, I'm deep in that hole, and it's so good.
And you're in that hole with James Spader. What could be worse?
James Spader's amazing.
He's fantastic.
He's so good. Anyway, so there was this UK defense think tank which had looked into a lot of this stuff, and it said basically that Russia's security and intelligence services have achieved greater success in Ukraine than their military.
Yeah,
So-
well, I would not be at all surprised. I mean, particularly on the cyber side, what's really interesting is they're incredibly active in cyber. And what's interesting as well is the Ukrainians' ability to react to that is
Yep.
equally as good. That seems to be the real battlefront at the moment, is more the intelligence side, particularly online.
Yep.
And then, even the Ukrainians are currently complaining to the Americans and the Germans, going, "You're giving us the wrong gear.
Yep.
You're sending us into tank battles with stuff that's designed to fight a counterinsurgency, not fight a mechanized battle."
Yep.
The Russians' tanks, I don't know, I love this. The Russian tanks are now called pop-tops.
Pop-tops.
Because what they do is their magazine is a carousel that sits directly below the turret. It's
Yeah.
an automatic system, an automatic loader.
And it pops?
And what
Pops
happens
off?
is if you get one canister of propellant, so with a tank shell, like any major artillery piece, you have the projectile, so the warhead goes in, and then you put a little packet of basically gunpowder
Yep.
inside behind it, and that way you can change your warheads out. You don't, and also shells when they're one big piece, they're bloody heavy.
Yep.
So one piece goes in, second piece goes in, so that sits on top. There's a ring of explosives sitting on top of a ring of projectiles. Now, that way the tank has one less person. It's lighter. It doesn't need to be as heavily armed. It's a lot more maneuverable. As soon as it gets hit with something, these little propellant cartridges
Pop off?
are not shielded. They actually, so if one goes, they all go. They literally blow off in a ring and they blow the turret off the tank.
I mean, apart from the fact that someone would die in that'd be quite cool.
Not someone, everyone in that tank dies. And also there's
How many people are in a tank, do you reckon?
Three. In the Russian tanks, there's
In the
three.
Russian tanks?
And look, it will blow the top off the tank. And there's a photo on Twitter. If I find it, I'll post it at I Spied Podcast. On X. And it's 2 stories up in a building. It's been flicked up and landed on top of the
Kind of
building.
a cool little game if it wasn't so horrific.
If it wasn't so deadly.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was, if you then respawned back in Russia with your parents. But this is the other thing that's coming. Russia's been very good at controlling the information sphere for everything getting back to the civilian population. It's not working anymore.
No, and what this think tank also found, and I've done a little bit of research on this, but it's getting a lot of those inmates and saying, do you want to go on work release and all of that?
Yeah,
and then they're just showing up in a war.
Yeah.
That they didn't know that they were being sent
Would you like to do an internship with a gun? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and then they're next minute they're signing up to the war, and then
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff is now feeding back.
That's feeding back, but also parents are finding their children not coming home, right?
Yeah.
And when I say their children, they're adult children.
He went to the store and now he's not coming back.
He went to buy a pack of cigarettes and now he's coming back in pieces.
Yes.
Right? And this is the real tragedy of what's going on is it's all getting exposed,
Yep.
and yet the intelligence services on both sides are doing an absolutely bang-up job in keeping this thing boiling. Right?
Yeah. So what this think tank found, and this think tank kind of came to these conclusions with a report that was compiled using sources including some captured documents.
Yep.
So Russian spy agencies actually began preparing for the invasion of Ukraine as far back as June 2021.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
No, exactly. But one of the things that they did find was that the FSB had said to Vladimir Putin, maybe hold off. We're not quite ready.
Not ready yet.
And he didn't.
Yeah, of course not.
So, and we've spoken about this, about how the spy agencies, FSB and everything have kind of said, no, maybe let's not invade right now.
But again, this comes down to any intelligence organisation in the world. You can argue the point till you're blue in the face, but if the leadership wants to go ahead, the leadership will go ahead. I mean, that's politics. And it's not, your job is to advise and act on policy, not to define and determine, right, when action is actually taking place. Now, just going back to that assassination of the assassination attempt on Vladimir Zelensky, What's interesting about that is, one, it's not the first one that's happened. He's the most targeted person on the planet right now. In fact, at one point someone said, how do you feel about these assassination attempts? Are you worried about it? And he said, if I was to worry about all the assassination attempts, I would literally be curled up in a ball under my bed. He said, I don't have the time to do what Vladimir Putin does and hide in a bunker. I've got to be out and I've got to be seen.
Yeah. So, but what was interesting is I feel like this woman wasn't very good. So,
well, either that or the intelligence services were. Right?
Yeah.
And that could come down to simply someone going, it's like when Misha, our friend of the podcast, Misha Zelensky, was basically saying that he was walking around Zelensky's hometown going, I'm looking for Volodymyr, the story of Volodymyr Zelensky, and he could only speak Russian, right? It could have been as simple as somebody asking questions and someone turning around to either a military officer or someone they knew who was active intelligence and went, this person keeps asking a lot of really bad questions.
Yeah, so this woman was essentially trying to ask about Zelensky's itinerary ahead of his visit to one of the regions. And
the plan was to hit it with a missile strike.
Yes. Now, Ukraine regularly accuses local residents who support Russia of passing info to help Moscow. So this is nothing new.
Yep.
So Zelensky said that the head of the SBU had updated him about the fight against traitors.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that, as we spoke about, this is quite complex. Like, it would be happening. You wouldn't even know who to trust.
Look, you wouldn't know who to trust. Interestingly enough, the big question is, okay, you kill him, what happens next?
Yeah.
Now, there's a really interesting thing. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive now into how assassination works because it's really important.
You mean you don't just get a gun and shoot someone?
Well, here's the thing. Why would you assassinate him, right? Okay, one, he's an extremely charismatic leader. He's managed to basically get most of the West on side.
It's pretty unusual, to be honest.
Yeah, it's very unusual. Now, the interesting thing is...
And it must be killing Putin that he's still alive.
A, he's still alive. B, he's still walking around in that green T-shirt. And C...
Everyone loves him.
Everyone loves him. Now, the interesting thing is the National Bureau of Economic Research in the United States did research into assassination. Of the 59 assassinations, that's how many there have been of national leaders since 1875. 59 national leaders have been killed. In that, assassination of autocrats produces major conflicts and problems in that country. But if you assassinate the leader of a democracy, it doesn't have that much impact.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, if you look at, say, the United States, which is probably one of the worst countries for the assassination of leadership, you've had 4 presidents shot.
Yeah.
There's been 15 attempted...
Well, everyone has a fucking gun.
Yeah, but so you've lost Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley and Kennedy. And the shooting of Kennedy still resonates. The shooting of Lincoln still resonates. 2 presidents have been wounded, Teddy Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan. 15 multiple plots against presidents, just plots. And that's just 15 presidents have had plots against them. Obama had the most. Trump, somebody was going to kill Trump with a forklift.
I mean, you would need a forklift.
Yeah. Now, so the thing is, the United States there is a lot of assassination that goes on in the United States, but the thing is, they have a clear line of succession.
But they also have access to guns and high grade military ammunition.
Yeah. There is that.
Forklifts.
They have access to forklifts.
And I would also counteract that the access to guns also changes their perspective on what they're willing to do.
Yes, definitely. You have the ability, you have access, you can actually...
Because you could just go, I don't like that person, I can just shoot that person dead. Whereas here, if you want to shoot someone, it would take a little bit of running around.
You got to do running around. You got to find a gun.
Got to find a gun. It would be really hard.
And easy. Honestly, it's just easier standing at the doors of Parliament House and going, you suck. And basically you've done your bit.
Yeah.
Or you start a podcast and then you have the right-left divide that we enjoy right now.
I am not right. I am centrist. Moderate. I'm a moderate.
I'm humanist. But the whole thing is, it's like assassination is an exceptionally useful tool in statecraft if it's used wisely and well and used against the right target. See, Putin, it's his number one suppressor is assassination. He just kills anyone outright. How many people have fallen out a window?
I mean, I don't know why they build places with windows anymore.
Man, my house would be a multi-story bunker.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is it's used as a tool because it leaves a political void. Now, in the Ukraine, the line of succession works that it'll be handed over to the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, which is their parliament. Now, this is a guy by the name of Ruslan Stefanchuk.
Yeah.
And he's pro-West, but he's not that popular. And most people would say that he would take over, but it would be the Minister of Defense, it would be the Zelensky's Chief of Staff. He'd take over, but it would be the Chief of Defense, the Foreign Minister, the Chief of Zelensky's staff that would then basically set up a triumvirate or a cabal of power until there is an election. Now, that's what would be appealing to Russia is as soon as you go to an election, that's something they can play with.
Yeah, 100%. And also, I mean, Zelensky is kind of the face of the war.
Man, it's going to be really hard to find someone replace him. In fact, they were talking about how there's another film star that's been working on his staff that they would probably look at putting forward because, again, he's a popular face. It's that weird thing. Everyone sort of went, Ronald Reagan, a movie star, becoming a president. But again, he's one of the most loved presidents, though looking at the Republican Party now, he would never make it as a Republican candidate.
Just to get back to the war, and I know that we've spoken extensively a lot about the Russian forces getting in there, but what we don't really talk about, even though it's probably pretty obvious, is how they seize Ukrainian government records from local headquarters. So every time they, take over a place, they would then go and then they would download the computer hard drives, which then allow them to build lists of who was working for the state and where they lived.
Yep.
And then they would go and they would torture them, allegedly. I mean, we know. And a lot of the times they weren't torturing them to flip them or to get information. They were using it as an intimidation tactic.
Yeah, well,
to kind of scare people.
It's the classic thing. Every now and then you have to kill a general to keep the others in line.
Yeah.
And this is a way of basically, and we talked about this not last week, the week before, where we were talking about how the use of intimidation is an exceptionally powerful tool. Now, particularly when you're in something like a war zone where it is the Wild West. There is no law. Once it becomes disputed territory,
it's every man for himself.
It's every man for himself, and you've really got to be careful as to what's going to happen to you.
So at least 800 Ukrainian officials were co-opted into working for the FSB. Now, some of them were willingly, some of them were coerced.
Yep.
And at the same time, electronic warfare units worked to cut off access to Ukrainian TV, radio, and the internet. So that's when they were trying to further isolate areas of the population. So it's interesting how these are all the things. Whenever we think of the war, we think of the tanks, we think of the guns.
Yes.
But this is where it's happening. This is the coal phase.
Let's go back to World War II, right?
Yeah.
Where we have the heroic storming of the beaches in Normandy, we have, Anzano, and we have North Africa campaign, we have the Russians doing their thing. All of this stuff goes on, right? But now with the distance of time, we're getting the stories of what the SOE and the OSS, so the intelligence services were doing to actually make those things possible. And that's the same thing with this. The Russians are keeping them, the Russian intelligence services are keeping the Russians in the war because their military is really unsatisfactory. I mean, and in a funny way, the West has underestimated the Russians and the Russians have underestimated the Ukrainians. And in fact, the West have underestimated Ukraine. Most of the West were thinking, well, this is going to be over in 3 days. Yeah. Literally, the 72 hours.
We all thought that.
Well, yeah, it's been 18 months to take 72 hours to take Kyiv. So this is the thing. It's like war is always a very fractious and extremely unpredictable situation to be in. Now, with the Russians and what they're doing, interestingly enough, one of the things that's come up at the moment that a lot of people are talking about, the Ukrainians especially, have gone, why are they still on the Security Council? Now, unfortunately, they are permanent members of the Security Council, and the only way you can be removed as a permanent member is all permanent members agree that you need to be removed. If you're a permanent member, you immediately veto that idea. So we can't actually get rid of Russia.
22.
But here's the interesting thing.
But I don't think we should be getting rid of Russia.
Well, yeah, at the moment, it's an autocratic regime that is.
I know, but we don't want to further isolate them.
We don't want to further isolate them, but we don't
keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Isn't that the old saying?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'll give you that. But the problem we have is anything that the UN want to do is automatically blocked.
I understand that, but we can't kick people out because we don't agree with them and don't like them. I mean, At the end of the day, there are a lot of countries that we don't agree how they're run. I mean, Saudi Arabia, big one. China,
and
they're
interestingly enough, the Saudi Arabians are currently the chair of the Human Rights Committee, which is
the irony is it's just dripping in irony.
How did that happen?
I don't know. But interestingly, with this think tank report, it did say, and we've spoken about this a lot as well, that the Russian special services lack the honesty to report accurately about their own efforts, which is kind of what their downfall is, and that there appears to be a systemic problem of over-reporting one's successes and concealing weaknesses to superiors. again, we've spoken about this,
Yeah.
but that is kind of what they see would be their downfall.
This is the major problem with an organisation, like any intelligence organisation in an autocratic regime.
Yep.
The autocrat wants to hear what he wants to hear.
Yep.
And if you don't tell him what he wants to hear, you will be punished for it. So immediately you're undermining your own ability to report intelligence correctly.
Yep.
And look, clear communication, one of the things that ASIO have been doing recently very well
Yep.
is reporting without fear or favour. I mean, one of the things that happens, depending on the government that's running whoever's in power at the time,
Yep.
sometimes our intelligence services can be politicised, and as soon as you politicise an intelligence organisation, you undermine its capacity to do its job correctly.
Right.
Now, with Russia, also it doesn't help that the big boss, that Putin is ex-KGB, which is what the FSB is now, he's already got his fingers in that pie. He's got a lot of control over that organisation, though at the moment what's also coming out of Russia is they're getting sick of it. The intelligence services don't like having to kowtow so much to one person.
Well, I would imagine too, it's kind of like a fruitless operation at the moment. I mean, you know, the spy networks are gaining where they're losing on the actual gaining of ground.
Exactly.
So at what point do you go, why are we doing this?
Well, I mean, one of the things that came up, and it was very interesting, is a beautiful animation on a group called Non-Credible Defense, which basically had, you know, Volodymyr Zelensky turning around to the West going, quick, give me that stuff, I really need it. Not yet. Not yet. No, I really need it. And meanwhile, in the background of this animation, there are just Russian troops putting in what are called dragon teeth, those big pyramids that stop tanks. The problem is it took so long for the West to arm Ukraine that what's happened is the Russians are dug in. And this is the big problem with the offensive at the moment. We don't know if the Ukrainian counteroffensive is really working. We don't know if the Russian counteroffensive is really working because, of course, the information coming out is extremely biased from both sides. We're doing really well. That's what no one's going to say, oh, look, we've screwed up and this isn't working.
At what point as a spy do you think this has gone on too far and where this is kind of a fruitless exercise and...
very often. Look, I can guarantee you there are intelligence officers that sit around just shaking their head going, why the hell are we still here? The problem being...
Because they'd be supremely... My take on, you know, these kinds of people is they'd be supremely intelligent. They'd be used to being in these situations and, you know, assessing the risk and assessing what's going on around them. So I feel like at some point they're like, why?
Yeah. Oh, look, that was one of the things that was always very interesting working at ASIO. There were moments, particularly like with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that completely changed the culture of ASIO.
Right.
That was 50% of what we did was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was gone. And thankfully, Saddam Hussein leapt out of the sand and gave us something else to focus on. And then the war on terror. Now, this is the thing. Your focus shifts.
We're not talking about terrorism at all.
What?
I can't remember the last time we talked about it.
I don't want to sound flip about it, but COVID literally killed terrorism as a problem for Australia. It's like Burjo has turned around over the last 2 or 3 annual reports and annual threat assessments and said espionage is our focus, because espionage is our focus and should always be our focus, because as much as we're going to have groups like, and ISIL is still there, Al-Qaeda is still there.
Of course they are.
You know, all of these different organizations are still around, but they're so marginalized now and they're so desperate to, there's so many power struggles going on within those organizations that they're kind of moribund. Now, does that mean they're going to go away forever? No.
I mean, I guess all they need is kind of like this idea of a cabal or something to kind of bring those marginalized groups together and then kind of start that fight again.
Well, one person basically created the war on terror by flying 3 planes or 4 planes or 2 planes into
and it was genius. It was genius.
Utterly brilliant strategic thinking. Long plan. And it did exactly what it planned to do. It dragged America into a war it didn't need to fight. Right? So that's one thing we've got to do. And look, the whole thing with intelligence working in Afghanistan, that was an industry. That became in Afghanistan and in Iraq, Australia had basically, through the War of Terror, Australia had more ASIO officers overseas than ASIS officers overseas.
Right.
Because we needed to liaise with so many people.
Yeah.
Right. And Iraq was a huge station for our intelligence services. Right. I had a mate who was posted to Baghdad, which was just like, holy crap, what's it like? And he went, noisy and yet very dull.
Yeah.
So the thing is, what's going on now is our focus will always shift. And at the moment, our focus is really hard on particularly places like Russia. China has not gone away. China is the really big winner out of this at the moment.
Oh, 100%, because they're all like, look over there, it's not us.
Yeah. But they're also, like I don't know if you heard about it, where a Filipino ship was protecting, they've done the same thing. The Filipinos have done the same thing the Chinese have done. They've taken a little island in the Spratlys, a little reef, and gone, well, they've run a ship aground and then they put troops there. But they've got to resupply them. So they used a Coast Guard cutter. Well, the Chinese showed up with an even bigger Coast Guard cutter and just kept spraying them with water.
Amazing.
Right? Now, the Filipinos were ready to open fire, and the Americans were saying, you can't. As soon as you do that, that's open warfare, and no one's ready for this. So the Chinese are still doing their grey zone stuff, still getting up to mischief, and at the moment, their espionage game is off the chart. And we do need to talk about it because there's been a lot of stuff happen recently with the Chinese. But the whole thing is the Chinese have gone, having a look. A guy's just invaded a country right next door and he's struggling. Do we really need to do Taiwan yet?
Yeah.
We'll keep rattling that saber because it keeps everybody else jumping. But right now, while we're rattling our saber, there's a whole bunch of other things we're doing down in India, over in Tibet, on the border of Vietnam. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and they have. I mean, China as well has a fair with TikTok has the whole soft power thing going on quite nicely.
Oh yeah.
Which I would like to talk to because I found some talk about as well because I found some interesting stuff about TikTok and the Chinese government. So maybe we should chat China.
I'd love to chat China. We should actually next episode. Let's do China,
and
also I want to do the Xi Jinping dancing video on TikTok. No, I'm kidding. There isn't one, though. There should be.
Okay.
All right. We done with Russia?
Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to go. I'm going to go over to the samovar and make myself a cup of tea.